Welcome to Whistle Where You Work. I'm Mark Cohen, Executive Director of the Government Accountability Project. Later in this half hour, a conversation about WikiLeaks. But first, the Food and Drug Administration is reportedly on the verge of approving the world's first genetically modified animal for human consumption. By inserting a couple genes from two other fish in the Atlantic salmon, biotech company AquaBounty says its hybrid salmon will grow to full size twice as quickly. Good idea? Just a high-tech form of the uncontroversial practice of breeding? Or are we opening a Pandora's box with potentially catastrophic health, environmental, and ethical dimensions? With us to consider genetically modified animals are Patty Lavera, Assistant Director of Food and Water Watch, and Eric Hoffman, Genetic Technology Policy Campaigner for Friends of the Earth. Welcome to Whistle Where You Work.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Patty, let's start with you. Putting aside genetic engineering altogether for a second, what are your feelings about farm raising of salmon?
I mean, salmon they're very high on the food chain of fish. I mean, these are big fish. They need to eat other fish, and it's hard to raise them in a way we think that really achieves a lot of the goals we should be having for how we raise our food. So there's a lot of concerns about salmon farms, impact on the environment. There's a lot of concerns about diseases that can breed there. We're talking about a lot of fish kind of basically in an open net somewhere in the ocean. And so when you have that many fish tightly packed together, we tend to have a lot of disease problems. Those diseases get out and spread to wild populations. So there's a lot of controversy about raising salmon in farms or aquaculture systems anyway. And then this, then adding in the issue of genetically engineered salmon is just a whole nother level of possible complication.
Now I'm wondering if AquaBounty might say that, well, what we're going to do is we're going to raise these fish twice as fast, therefore it should remove some of the problems, health problems among the fish by bringing them to market much more quickly.
I'm sure that is their argument, but we can't remove this from the context of, kind of industrialized agriculture and food processors and what we're always dealing with. And we always hear those arguments, and then we always end up with, so if you raise, the animal twice as fast, they'll put twice as many in there. I mean, they always seem to compensate to keep these facilities, to make them even more intensive and industrialized. The pressure is just always on to have them bigger, faster, and we keep seeing consequences from that. So rather than have these conversations about, what are sustainable ways to raise food, what is the right amount of food, what is the right type of food for a region of the world or the country, we keep getting these kind of silver bullets that these technologies are going to fix it. And we've yet to see that happen. We just kind of keep changing into different problems. So we have a lot of baggage, from the context of agriculture and raising food, that these quick fix technologies usually don't work.
What you mentioned before was a situation where the fish were being farm raised in kind of ocean settings. Now AquaBounty says we're not going to do that. We're going to do this in some kind of inland waterway that is so that the fish will not cross-contaminate with other salmon, and the eggs of these fish will all be female and will be sterile, so there's no danger of cross-contamination that way either.
That sounds very ambitious on the part of this company, and once again, I mean, we can't forget the experience we have with other technologies and other attempts at modifying food. Very often these companies don't live up to these promises. It's very hard to raise salmon in an inland system. I mean, there's always rumors about it, but we've not seen it done in a commercial basis. They're big fish. They need a lot of space. They need to eat a lot. It's hard to do that in an inland system. Lots of people that are doing inland systems are for other types of fish that are much lower on the food chain. And then, in terms of we promise they'll be sterile, and we'll promise, they'll be contained. Not to get too far ahead into the FDA process, but FDA gives us very little as the public to know if they're really checking these claims. And the track record of FDA and the track record of this industry is not good, that those claims will actually be met. So there's a lot more that they have to prove before that's good enough to let this into the food system, in our opinion.
And we're talking about genetic engineering here. Exactly, Eric, how does it work in fish?
Well, genetic engineering technologies in general are pretty similar when you're talking about seeds or animals. Largely, you take a gene from one organism that you want. Say in corn, they found a gene that produced a toxin called Bt in bacteria, and they put that into the corn cell, largely by engineering that gene into a virus, and then the virus inserts the gene into the new organism. It's a really crude technology, and often it doesn't work, and so it's really hard to get it right. But when they do get it right, that's when you see these companies moving forward with commercialization of the technology.
Okay, so they're going to take these seeds and stuff them into the genes of a salmon, an Atlantic salmon, and come up with this new, faster growing salmon that they can get to market more quickly. This is really just breeding, isn't it? A kind of a 21st century version of breeding, which we've been doing since the beginning of the 19th century.
Well, breeding has been done for a really long time, and usually you're using the same species, so the same genes in a species that have evolved for, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years, are just being used and directed in a way that, the farmer or the fisher would want. But now we're actually taking genes from a different species, different organisms, and putting them in new organisms in ways that nature never intended it to. And so we really don't know the consequences. AquaBounty is making the claims that it's safe, and the FDA is agreeing with them, but FDA is only using AquaBounty's own research. No one else is actually able to look at their process because it's proprietary information right now. So really it's upon the government to do their own independent tests to make sure that the food is actually safe, and it's going to be safe for the public and safe for the environment. And right now we don't have that guarantee.
But we have some track record with food crops. A lot of our corn, a lot of our soybeans, a lot of the frozen processed foods that we eat are chock full of genetically modified organisms. And we all seem to be here right now. We're not dead. Is there any evidence that these are causing problems in the food chain?
I mean, there have been a number of studies showing, particularly in rats, when they eat genetically engineered food, whether it's corn or soy or potatoes, that they have serious health problems, including stomach lesions, including toxicity found in the liver, and even sterility. But really the issue for us is that the government is not tracking genetically engineered foods. It's not labeling genetically engineered foods, so consumers don't have a choice of what foods they buy or not. And since they're not tracking, we don't know where the genetically engineered foods actually are. And we're also not looking to see if there are adverse health effects. The FDA pretty much agreed in the 90s saying that genetically engineered foods are quote-unquote substantially equivalent to non-genetically engineered foods. And with that decision, they decided to not look at any of the foods for health safety, for environmental safety. And it's important to note the person that made that decision was a former vice president at Monsanto, who's now in charge of food safety at the FDA.
So, I mean, they're doing the experiment now, we're just not looking at the results. We're eating it, and it's no one's job to track it. It's no one's job to see if there are adverse effects, and there might be some out there, and we're not looking for them.
So we're genetically modified guinea pigs,
yeah.
as it were. So what kind of testing should there be? What should we know before we say this stuff is okay to eat?
I mean, I think there's several tracks of it. I mean, in terms of human health, there's a lot of people that are concerned about potential allergy issues. You've never triggered that allergy response in some subset of people because that trait was never there before. So there's a whole track of allergy safety. There's basic, safety questions. Is this food digestible in the same way that its non-modified counterpart is? And then what gets lost in the shuffle a lot of times that I think both of our groups are very interested in is the bigger picture of our food system. What role does a genetically modified crop like corn or soy or fish play? And so for the ones we're living with corn and soybeans, they were put out there the general hype about genetic modification and genetic engineering and biotech is that this is how we're going to feed the planet, and we can cure diseases with this, and we can make this food do this other thing. What it's done is help Monsanto sell pesticides. They sell the seeds that are engineered to grow into a plant that you can douse, with an herbicide, technically, and it will survive and the weeds will die. That's what it's done. It's been a chemical herbicide promoting technology. They've been quite successful with it. And so what is the environmental impact of relying on the use of these chemicals? We're not getting that analysis, and lots of the debate about genetic engineering is really about the environment.
Well, how should it be tested? I mean, if it isn't tested in real time, in our real environment, in real people, with real food, then what kind of testing should there be? What kind of criteria should there be for putting this on the market, or should there have been? But now we can do it with the salmon. We could do it with animals. We didn't do it with farm products, with the crops. But what should we have to know before we say this stuff is okay?
Well, I think the government needs to prove that the foods are 100% safe for public consumption and for the environment. Right now, we kind of have a reactionary approach where we put stuff in the market, we hope that everything works out, and then we kind of check later on. What we need to do is use precaution moving forward and make sure that these foods are completely safe. So the burden's on the government and the burden's on the corporations. It's not on the public to prove that they're not safe.